Hello, welcome everyone. Let's just wait a few seconds until everybody arrives. Just 1 minute and we are about to begin. Welcome everyone. Hello, Peterson. Nice to have you here. That's great. Hello, Laura. Carla, everybody's coming in. We have 45 participants at this moment. People are still getting in. Just feel comfortable to say where you are connecting from. It's good to know where you are connecting from. Hello, everyone. São Paulo, Brasília, that's wonderful. Salvador, Campinas, Rio de Janeiro, that's wonderful. São Paulo também. Okay, Santa Maria, that's great. All right, wonderful. I think we can make a start. Good afternoon, everyone from São Paulo. Welcome everyone to another webinar sponsored by Cambridge, Brazil. My name is Sergio Varela. I'm a product marketing manager and I look after the titles for the adults, young adults, and higher education segment. So, today we have another great speaker, but before I introduce her, there's some housekeeping we need to do, okay? So you can interact using the chat box during the session, but please leave the Q&A box for questions to be answered at the end, okay? So the Q&A, the question and answer box, just leave it for questions to be answered by Jade at the end of the session, okay? It is possible to get a certificate of participation in this webinar, so we'll put a link in the chat box to a short feedback form about today's webinar. It's very important for our work, so please have the time to do it, okay? So after completing this feedback form, you'll be able to download the certificate in PDF format, right? Well, this webinar is being recorded and will be soon available on the Cambridge Brazil YouTube channel, right? Okay, so today we have the pleasure to have with us Jade Blue, and the title of her talk is Developing Learner Autonomy in Digital Learning Contexts. So Jade is an English language teacher, trainer, researcher, and materials developer whose primary research interests focus on learner autonomy and integrating life skills into classroom practice. Jade regularly creates academic training content for major ELT publishers and works closely with the Insight application team at Cambridge University Press and Assessment. So Jade, welcome. Thank you very much for being with us today, and it's over to you.
Thank you, Sergio. It's a pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for a lovely introduction. And hello to everyone who's joining us today. So I can see we've got 64 people in the room so far. I'm not sure if that includes me or not. But first of all, thank you for coming on your Friday afternoon. I think it's 4 o'clock in Brazil at the moment. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Great. And well, here it's 8 o'clock. I'm in Wales in the UK, so it's dark outside and nearly time for a glass of wine. Before we get going, let me just check that you can see me and that you can hear me all right. So just say a quick hello to me in the chat box. Just say yes, that you can hear me. Thank you, Carla. That's a gift from my parents, my name. Hello. Great. Okay, so everyone can hear me and see me okay. So today we're going to be talking about developing learner autonomy in digital learning contexts. And throughout the session, I'm going to be asking you to get involved and share your ideas. So please be ready with the chat box. Feel comfortable contributing your thoughts. I will be reading as much as I can. And I think it's really valuable for us to share our thoughts and our experiences together with these now 68 people in the room. We have a wealth of joint expertise in this online space. Okay, so before we get going, I just want to start off by finding out a little bit about you and about your teaching contexts. So you should see a poll come up on your screen now. And the question here is, what is your teaching context? So you've got 3 options and you can choose more than one option. You've got face-to-face classes, online classes, or hybrid classes, which is when you're teaching with some students in the room and some online. So what's your typical teaching context? Where are you? What's your environment like normally? So choose your answers for the poll, take your vote. And as I say, you can select more than one option if you're teaching in more than one context. So my teaching contexts are quite varied. I do quite a lot of online teaching now, and I do some face-to-face classes and training. When the pandemic necessitated, I also did some hybrid classes. And if anyone's selected hybrid classes, you'll know that they're quite a different beast from our normal face-to-face or online contexts. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to vote. So we'll see the results of the poll now. Let's have a look at those results and see what comes up. Okay. Oh, great. So we've got 67%. I don't know if you guys can see that too. We've got 67% of you teaching in online classes, 44% in face-to-face classes, and we've got 7% there in hybrid. So we've got a bit of a mix, just a few in hybrid contexts. They're quite interesting, aren't they? And just a majority of online. So you're in absolutely the right place. Even those of you that are teaching in face-to-face contexts, your students will be using digital and online resources to help and support and inspire their learning. So hopefully during today's session, you'll get some insights and interesting ideas that you can use in your teaching. Okay, thank you for taking part in that. So this is what we're going to do today. We're going to explore the concept of learner autonomy and what it involves in digital learning contexts. We're going to consider how learner autonomy can benefit both learners and teachers. And we're going to introduce a range of practical approaches to developing learner autonomy in digital learning contexts. So why have we decided to do this session? Well, let's think about teaching and learning and how they've changed in the past 5 years. So of course, you'll be very aware that your own teaching experiences, environments, and more widely, education has changed a lot in recent years. But how have teaching and learning changed in the last 5 years? Let's get your ideas in the chat box. So what do you think? How have teaching and learning changed? I'll give you a moment just to answer that question. Okay, so Elaine, straight in, technology, thank you. Okay, so we're using technology more and more, aren't we? Marcia, we've got, after the pandemic, they changed a lot, using more digital technology. Wilma's working exclusively online since the pandemic. So that's a really big change, and it sounds like a long-term change for you, Wilma, as well. A lot of teachers have to learn how to use tech tools. Yeah, so suddenly we're having to upskill and change our skills and change what we're familiar with. Delivering more and more online classes, James. We've got students having classes online, becoming more technological. So lots of people saying the same thing. Angelo saying lately you've been looking for AI tools. So that's another kind of, post-pandemic, we're moving more towards that now as well. It's a whole nother area to explore. We've got Luann. 3 years ago, I taught my first online class in 9 years, and now I work 100% from home. What a change, Luann. I hope you're not finding it too challenging. I hope you're getting some enjoyment out of that change as well. So we've got lots of similar answers here. Changed completely, had to learn a lot as far as technology is concerned. The tools are different. Interesting. Teaching and learning are the same, but the tools are different. It's a great answer. Having to learn a new way overnight. So lots of thank you. This is great. It's really nice to see you contributing. But we've got lots of people talking about the same thing, talking about technology, talking about platforms, talking about digital tools and having to learn these things. Okay, thank you for taking the time to answer that. These are my thoughts. So the need for our learners to engage with digital and online learning materials has accelerated rapidly in recent years. In an increasingly unpredictable world, our learners need the skills to be able to work more independently and regulate their own learning in remote and online settings. So you'll see some overlap with your comments in the chat box. And what particularly stands out for me here is the words accelerated rapidly. That sudden change in the way that education is delivered as a result of the pandemic. And also this sense that the world is increasingly unpredictable. Digital technologies, learning contexts are ever evolving and changing. And because of this, learner autonomy is becoming increasingly valuable and necessary for students to learn more effectively in remote contexts. Okay, but what is learner autonomy? What do you already know? What do you understand by the term? Let's get your ideas into the chat box. What do you understand by this term, learner autonomy? And I see that Lice here has written more autonomy. So Lice, what do you think? What does that mean to you, more autonomy for students? Okay, so Gabriella, you've written looking for better teacher. So is that maybe that's something that a student might do if they're feeling autonomous, is identify their own teacher in an online setting because they're not necessarily tied to the face-to-face classroom. Okay, here we go. We've got capacity to manage without the tutor. Interesting answer. Do we still need teachers if learners are autonomous? James has got learning by themselves. Interesting. Independency, learning by oneself. Shalina, for the learner to be conscious about their path and language acquisition. That's a really interesting answer. Let's keep a mental note of that, for the learner to be conscious about their path and language acquisition. We've got learning to study effectively by themselves, Carolina, inspiring students to take charge of their own learning. That's a nice expression, to take charge of. Being able to independently keep themselves on track, giving students the right tools so they can make their own choices. Lice, thank you. Many things, but somehow learn to learn. Nicola, yeah, that's a great answer. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Cambridge Life Competencies Framework, but there is a learning to learn key competency in that. And there is a lot within that competency that relates to learner autonomy. Students have to develop skills by themselves. That's a question. I wonder if that's true. The capacity to make research and identify the best material. So doing their own research, perhaps, yeah, outside of the classroom, developing the capacity to learn. Okay, student agency, that's a lovely word, agency, the ability to take action or to know what action to take. I love this concept of agency, and I think it is really important in learner autonomy. Thank you, Letitia. Okay, thank you for sharing your answers. So learner autonomy, what is learner autonomy? At its simplest, learner autonomy is the ability to take charge of one's own learning. And I noticed a couple of people, somebody used that phrase, to take charge. So there's lots of overlap with your ideas there. And this is sometimes referred to as self-regulated learning. So self-regulation is the ability to understand, to monitor, and to manage one's own behaviors. In this case, we're talking about learning behaviors. But although autonomous learning is about taking responsibility for our own learning, that doesn't mean that it has to be isolated. It can also involve learning with and from other people. So have a look at this. And just notice the difference here between being alone and being autonomous. So alone is without other people. Autonomous is independent and having the power to make your own decisions, a sense of agency, if you like. So learner autonomy is not necessarily about learning alone. And some learners do engage independently on their own in individual activities and tasks that allow them to practice and reflect on their learning. But authentic and meaningful interaction with other people is still really important for helping learners construct new skills and knowledge. And we're going to have a look a bit later at ways that we can help learners access this kind of interaction with other people, even in remote learning contexts when they're not in the face-to-face classroom. So, learner autonomy is about taking responsibility for our own learning. But how does that actually work in practice? What does that actually involve? What do autonomous learners actually do? Well, we're going to have a look at 3 stages involved in autonomous learning. And these are forethought and planning, monitoring and control, and reflection and evaluation. And this is adapted from a framework of self-regulated or autonomous learning, which was developed in 2002 by the educational psychologist Paul Pintrick. And it's important to view these stages as part of a dynamic and ongoing process. And they're not things that happen in isolation, just one thing, and then we're done. It's like a cycle. So you can see that from the arrows here on the screen in the diagram. So forethought and planning is about looking ahead. It's about looking forward. And it's about learners asking themselves, what will I do and how will I do it? So let's have a look at a quick activity to see how this might work in the classroom. So this is called Toolbox. And before learners start working on a task, we can encourage them to identify and to collect the tools that they will need to be able to complete the task. And you can give them ideas to help them think of what those tools are and identify those tools. So they might be things like a pen and paper, dictionary, a clock, but they don't always have to be physical. They can also be more abstract or linguistic things, like having some quiet time to think, having some help from the teacher, having some notes, some of their notes about whichever language point they might be focusing on, for example. So this is getting them to identify and collect the tools they need to be able to complete a particular task. So if you think about this webinar, this session that you're in now on your Friday afternoon, what tools are you bringing to this session? What's in your toolbox right now that you're using in this webinar? What tools did you have set up before you came in here into the virtual room that we're in? So for me, I've got all sorts of tools. I've got lots of physical tools. I've got my computer here in front of me, my screen. I've got my keyboard. I've always got my notebook and a pen in case I want to write something down. But I've also got water in case I get a dry mouth from talking a lot. My cup. We've got a lovely answer from Ghislaine here in the chat box. I don't know if you can see that. Motivation. So that's a really interesting tool. And for a lot of learners, that's a tool that they need in order to be able to complete different tasks. Samela says the Zoom app, internet, tablet. Okay, so those kind of physical things, but also those digital, the internet. How do you describe that? It's not a physical thing, is it? But those kind of tools as well. So what is in your toolbox and what tools do you need to complete a task? So this activity helps students to become more autonomous by managing their own learning environment and planning their learning. And if you're teaching in an online context, then digital mind mapping tools, things like Miro, are a really good way for learners to brainstorm and build on each other's ideas of what they might need for a task. So you can use those kind of platforms for them to share their ideas and their thoughts when they're planning. Okay. So let's have a little look at monitoring and control now. So Toolbox for forethought and planning. Monitoring and control is about looking at what's happening in the moment. And it's about learners being conscious of how they're learning and asking themselves, what am I doing? How am I doing it? How can I improve what I'm doing? Do I need help? let's have a look at an example activity for this. So this is called Today I Feel. And you can use this at the start of a lesson or a project or a task, or you can use it in the middle, or you can use it at the end. So have a look at this sentence on the screen. Today I feel da 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 about learning, but I would feel differently if da 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 because da 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 da. And so we ask learners to write this sentence in their notebooks or on their screens and to complete the gaps in a way that is true for them. And I'd like you to try this. I'd like you to think about how you are right now, Friday afternoon. How do you feel about learning today? And what might make you feel differently and why? So take a moment just to complete this sentence for you. And if you're feeling brave, please share it in the chat box. We'd love to hear each other's thoughts. So finish this sentence in a way that is true for you and share it in the chat box if you can. I'll give you a moment just to do that. So for me, today, I feel excited about learning in this session with you guys because you're sharing your ideas. But I would feel differently if nobody had answered any questions so far, and you all answered lots of questions earlier, which is really rewarding for me. So that's my kind of answer. I also feel energized, but I would feel differently if I didn't have a cup of coffee here because I'd probably be a bit more sleepy. Okay, we've got an answer in from Lice. Thank you, Lice. Today, I feel highly motivated about learning. Wow, that's really exciting. But I would feel differently if the webinar were focused on face-to-face lessons because I teach 100% remotely. Okay, so that's really interesting. So Lice, what you've done there is you have identified what it is about the learning experience for you that is making you motivated. And this is really useful to know for you going forward. So you're developing learner autonomy there, that self-awareness. Lovely answer, thank you. Wilma, today I feel highly motivated about learning. Again, great. But I would feel differently if I hadn't brought my coffee because I really love it. Yeah, I completely hear you, Wilma, cheers. Thank you guys for sharing your answers. Ghislaine has got today I feel motivated, but I would feel differently if I had to work because I used to work a lot, or I'm used to working a lot, maybe. We've got I feel great. You're all very positive. This is, I mean, you're here on a Friday afternoon, so thank you. It's lovely to see you so enthusiastic. I would feel differently if I were in the beginning of the week because I'd be less tired. Yeah, I hear you, Angela. Friday, so weekend coming up. Today I feel excited about learning, Laura, but I would feel differently if the webinar was, oh, I've lost you. Where is it? I'd feel differently if the webinar, if the subject wasn't related to my needs because I have a tight schedule. Yeah, good, okay. Thank you very much, guys, for sharing your answers. So this task for students today, I feel, is encouraging them to reflect on their emotions about the learning experience in the moment that they're in the process of a task or an activity. And so it's encouraging them to take control of their own learning by managing those attitudes and emotions and identifying what works or doesn't work for them. Okay, let's have a look at reflection and evaluation. So we've had forethought and planning, looking forward, monitoring and control in the moment. And of course, reflection and evaluation is about looking back. And it's about learners asking themselves things like, what did I learn and how can I do better next time? So an activity that can help with this is what we call a capture grid. I don't know if you've seen a capture grid before. It's a great activity. You can use it in lots of different ways. And I've used it here for reflection. So this is to help learners capture their thoughts and reflect on their learning experience. So in reflection tasks, I give my students a piece of paper, or if we're working online, then they can use Microsoft Word or whatever kind of Word program they prefer. And I have them divide this paper or their screen into 4 quarters. And the top left corner is labeled likes. And this is where they make notes about things that they liked, things that they enjoyed about the learning experience. The top right-hand corner is labeled criticisms, and this is where they will capture any sort of negative thoughts or criticisms, things that they didn't like or things that they found challenging. And the bottom left corner is called questions, and this is where they write down questions that they might still have about the content or about the experience. And lastly, the bottom right corner should be labeled ideas, and this is where they note down any ideas for how they might go forward with an activity or a task, or with their learning more generally. And during the reflection session, I ask learners to make sure that each of these quarters has at least a few notes. So this activity helps students to reflect on and evaluate their own learning, making sure that they're covering lots of different aspects. They're not just channeling their reflection into one area. And this, of course, helps them to become more autonomous. So this is reflection and evaluation, looking backwards. So we have forethought and planning, monitoring and control, and reflection and evaluation. Notice these questions are very much about students being conscious and aware of what they're doing and how. And you'll remember that somebody put in the chat box earlier when we were talking about what is learner autonomy, somebody used this word conscious, and that's really important here. So this is about self-regulation. It's about the ability to understand and manage our own behaviors. And it also involves metacognition. So it's metacognition is awareness, knowledge, understanding of your own thinking. So it's thinking about thinking, if you like. So it's not just thinking about what you're learning, but also stepping outside of yourself to have a critical awareness of how you're thinking and how you're learning. Excuse me. So we're going to have a look at some practical approaches to supporting learners in each of these areas when teaching in digital and online contexts. And of course, the 3 activities that we've already looked at, you can adapt to use these in online contexts too. But before we have a look at some more, I'd like you to think about this question. How does learner autonomy benefit students? Why is it valuable for students to have this ability to take charge of their own learning? Why is it valuable for them to be able to understand and manage their own behaviours? Let's get your ideas into the chat box again, because you're really good at that. How does learner autonomy benefit students? Okay, thank you, Laura, with the first answer there. It helps them and us with their progress. Well noted, not just learners, but teachers too. We're going to come to them in a minute. They learn to learn, Danilo. Yeah, it increases their interest in learning. Okay, Marcia, so we've got something to do with engagement, motivation there as well. Helps them feel more motivated. Some of us said the same thing. Helps them to be more independent. They learn for life. That's nice, yeah. We talked a lot at the beginning about these big changes in education and the way that it's delivered and the way that we're learning. And we talked about this unpredictability in the world and the future. We don't know what's going to happen and how it's going to happen. But learning for life, that's really important. That's lovely. So it's something you can take forward with you. We've got Shalina, they become the protagonists of their own learning process. What a lovely way of describing it, Shalina, thank you. The teacher acts as a facilitator. Okay, so learner autonomy. Shalina is not disregarding the teacher in this. That's interesting. And I agree with you. They can feel their evaluation better. Nice, Caroline. Feel your evaluation. That's lovely. They don't feel so pressured. The learning process becomes more natural, less dependent on the teacher's interventions. You've got some great contributions here, guys. Thank you. They can see that their effort is paying off. Okay, so it's that thing of awareness, that consciousness of how you're learning. You know what effort you're putting in and you can see the results. That's lovely. Responsibilities is another one. Saving time because they feel confident to do things by themselves. Lovely. Great. You've got a lot of similar ideas to me. This is fantastic. I'll have a look at this here. I'll give you a moment just to read that. Okay, so we've got positive effect on learning strategies, motivation levels, and academic performance. So learner autonomy is believed to play a crucial role in a person's academic and personal success. Somebody said life, learning for life there. And studies have consistently reported a strong correlation between the use of metacognitive and self-regulatory strategies and L2 learners' language proficiency. So there's a lot of evidence that being more autonomous, self-regulating, being conscious of what you're doing and how you're doing it leads to better learning outcomes as well. So lots of overlap there with your ideas. Okay, so we talked a little bit about students, how learner autonomy benefits students, and somebody touched on teachers. So let's talk about teachers. How does learner autonomy, benefit teachers? Let's get your ideas in the chat box. We've had a few already, but let's get some more. Let's go back. Here we go. It was Laura who said it helps them and us with their progress. So helping teachers with identifying learners' progress. That's interesting. How does it help us as teachers? What other ideas do you have? Do we want our learners to be autonomous? Why? Why not? Okay, Marcia, students become not so dependent on teachers, and it can be really helpful for online classes. Yeah, absolutely. We just don't have the same type of interaction, do we, in online learning environments? Let's not pretend it's the same, because it's not. We can't respond in the same way. We don't see the same things and feel the same things. Angelo, better performance in class, more motivation, confidence to keep learning the language. Nice. So we want our students to be motivated. Of course we do. That's much, much nicer for us. It's easier for us to understand their difficulties when they share, Lewis. Yes, if they understand themselves better, then we can understand them better. Lysa gives us tools to understand what our learners need help with. Good, so we can provide them with what they need. Exactly, brilliant. We're able to better cater for students' needs. Henrique, lovely. Ultimately takes the burden of learning off the teacher's back. Yeah, it's not. Is it our responsibility to make sure our students learn everything they need to learn? Should it be? The teacher can focus on student-specific needs rather than having to take care with every single step of the content. Yeah, okay, fantastic ideas. Thank you very much. Lots of overlap there. I've said the same thing. Teachers learn more about their students. When students are more autonomous, they learn more about themselves. And this enables teachers to learn more about their students. And when we know more about our students, we can offer them better guidance. We can plan and prepare subsequent lessons more appropriately. We can teach better. And lessons are more enjoyable for the teacher. So we've seen that promoting self-regulation and metacognition in the classroom results in learners being more motivated. And when they're more motivated and engaged, lessons are more enjoyable and more fun for us as teachers. And when students are more autonomous, learning is less teacher-centered and more learner-directed. So this means that the focus isn't always on us all of the time. In synchronous classes, which run in real time, teachers can spend more lesson time exploring and introducing new ideas. And in asynchronous classes, when learners are studying in their own time, then we can spend more time offering guidance to help students get the most from their out-of-class experience. So lots of benefits for teachers as well as students. Okay, thank you for your contributions. So we're going to focus now on developing learner autonomy in digital and online learning contexts. And as we know from the past few years, remote learning requires students to be more autonomous than they might be in a traditional classroom. So in the physical absence of the teacher, learners might need to set their own learning goals and work towards them. They might need to motivate and encourage themselves throughout the learning process, and they might need to evaluate their own progress. So how can we help students to do this? Well, we need to make sure that our students have the tools that they need to work independently, to work autonomously. So one thing we can do that's really valuable is to introduce them to different online learning aids and digital tools. And I'm sure that for many of you working online, this is something that you've started to do already. And of course, we need to train our students in how to use them, or in some cases, they might be training us in how to use them. And we need to encourage students to reflect on their experience. So let's just think about this online learning aids and digital tools. What kind of tools and learning aids are you already familiar with? What are you already using in your classrooms, particularly those of you that are teaching online? Are you just using the platform, or are you using other things too? Those of you teaching face-to-face, are you using digital tools as well as just, for example, hard copy paper and so on? So let's get some of your answers in the chat box there. What digital tools and online learning aids are you already using or familiar with? So just to get you started, for example, a type of online learning aid might be an online dictionary, which my students use a lot in class all the time, whether that's face-to-face or online. And an example of a digital tool might be a mind mapping tool or platform such as Miro, which learners can use in lots of different ways to organize and share information. So what about you? Okay, Carla, we've got Zoom. That's probably your platform, I'm guessing. Google Meet, quizzes, lovely. Oh, Gartic. Gartic dictionaries. I don't know Gartic. That's interesting. I'm going to look that up. Dictionaries, so websites or apps, etc. Lovely. Gartic. Thank you, Carla. Google Apps. We've got Canva. Yeah, Canva's fantastic, isn't it? Love that. Powtoon, YouTube. Oh, Daniel, we've got TV news, smartphone apps. Lovely. Kahoot, of course, is a great one. Bamboozle, Wordwall, Kahoot. You guys need to all get together and share all your ideas with each other, because you've got some fantastic stuff here. Padlet, apps, Wordwall, Cambridge Dictionary, Thesaurus, Google Classroom, lovely. And Samela, even though I'm teaching face-to-face, I use Flip. Good, excellent. We're going to talk about Flip. Live worksheets, Kahoot for crew, Cool English. We've got Jamboard, love Jamboard. Great. Okay, so you're engaging a lot with stuff already, and that's fantastic. So we're going to have a look at some different practical approaches and some digital tools to help support students develop autonomy in digital learning contexts. We don't have time to look at everything. You know a lot of stuff already. What I would say is that as we're looking at different things, maybe think about how you can use different tools with different activity types. So remember that we identified these 3 stages involved in autonomous learning: forethought and planning, monitoring and control, and reflection and evaluation. So let's start with forethought and planning. And this is about learners asking themselves, what will I do and how will I do it? And we can break this down into more detailed questions, such as what's my goal? What steps will I take in order to get there? What resources do I need? So in a digital or remote learning context, then you might start by encouraging learners to think about, discuss, and decide how they will approach tasks, activities, and projects. So it's this planning, it's this looking forward aspect. Again, being conscious. What are you going to do and how are you going to do it? And then you can invite learners to use a digital whiteboard or a mind mapping tool, such as Miro or Google Jamboard, to organize their plan. So this could be a plan for a specific lesson, for a task, for a goal, for a project, or it could be a plan for learning more broadly, if you're talking about their end goals, why they're learning English more generally. And you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen, there are some example templates here. These are from Miro. I love Miro. It's one of my favorite platforms. And the nice thing about Miro is it offers loads of flexibility for how students can use it. So you can select templates as a teacher, or your students can select their own templates, or you can also work with a blank canvas and build your own structure for how you want to organize information. And finally, encourage learners to share their ideas in a collaborative digital portfolio, such as Padlet. Some people have mentioned Padlet already, or Bulb. And this collaborative sharing aspect is really important, because remember that although some learners might be in contexts that require them to practice and reflect on their learning independently, authentic and meaningful interaction is still very important. And this interaction doesn't only take place in a traditional face-to-face classroom, but it can also happen online or remotely. And arguably, it has to now, because people are working more and more online and remotely. Most of my colleagues now I interact with over the internet, not face-to-face. And this is a nice way to start familiarizing learners with mind mapping tools and collaborative portfolios. Padlet's particularly good. Samella's saying, I love Padlet. I love Padlet. It's great. It's just this is our place. This is our portfolio. And of course, you can use these tools in lots of different ways to help students organize and consolidate what they're learning. And once you've introduced learners to these tools and they're familiar with how to use them, they can then start to use them independently as well, outside the classroom, beyond their lessons with you, going forward in life. Okay, let's have a look at monitoring and control. So we're going to do an activity together now, and you're going to need a pen and paper. We're going to do this quite quickly, so get ready. On your pen and paper, I would like you to draw a circle divided into 4 segments, and I'd like you to draw a little sketch of yourself in the center. Doesn't have to be fancy artistic sketch, just a little outline of yourself. And in the first box, I would like you to think about this session and what you're doing. And I'd like you to make some notes about what you're doing. So think of this as a general question. If someone came into the room now and said, what are you doing? How would you answer them? What would you say? So put some notes in that first box. You're welcome to put your ideas in the chat box as well as we go along through this. For this first question, I'm going to give you a few clues. So you might say something like, I'm attending a webinar, I'm finding out what learner autonomy is, I'm learning how to develop learner autonomy in digital learning context. So this is about, what are you doing? In the second box, I'd like you to think about how you're doing it. So you've identified what you're doing, but how are you actually doing it? Are you listening? Are you watching? Are you making notes? Are you making notes on screen or on paper? Are you drawing notes? Maybe you're doodling. Are you writing full sentences or just keywords? Are you thinking about how the content applies to your own teaching context and your own students? So we've got, what am I doing? How am I doing it? In the third box, how's it going? What's your experience like? Are you finding it easy? Are you finding it challenging, thought-provoking, inspiring? How are you feeling? And why might you be feeling like that? How's it going? So we've got, what am I doing? How am I doing it? How's it going? And in the fourth box, how can I improve the way I'm doing it? So maybe, for example, if you think about the way you're taking notes now in this session, maybe your notes could be grouped into things to try and things to think about. Maybe you've got distractions at home. Maybe you've got the cat trying to walk across your keyboard, and you might learn better without those kind of distractions. Maybe you wish you had different color pens or post-it notes. So how can you improve the way you're doing it? So what's especially nice about this activity is it enables learners to monitor and to control the way they're learning by thinking consciously about the strategies that they're using or that they could use. Now, I asked you to do this activity on paper, but of course, learners can use a digital whiteboard or a mind mapping tool such as Miro, Google Jamboard to make their framework and to think about the questions. And they can share their ideas in a collaborative digital portfolio such as Padlet or Bulb to compare their answers and support each other with observations and suggestions. And again, once learners are familiar with this activity, they can use it independently to monitor different aspects of their learning, different projects, different tasks, such as reading or writing tasks, language practice activities, and so on. And you can use it in the middle of the lesson, you can use it just before the break, you can use it at the end of the lesson. So there's a lot of flexibility with this activity. Okay, let's have a look at reflection and evaluation. And if you remember, this is about learners asking themselves, what did I learn and how can I do better next time? So I'd like you to imagine that your learners have just completed a task or a lesson or a project, and you want them to reflect and evaluate their learning experience. How can you do this? What questions could you ask them? Let's get your ideas in the chat box here. So reflection and evaluation questions. What are you going to ask your students? How can we get our learners to reflect? What do we want to ask them? What do we want them to think about? Here we go, and we're off. Okay, nice. What would you do differently if you had the chance to do it again? Nice. Always useful question. Always useful. And it's not just reflecting, but that's thinking about going forward as well, which is really lovely. How did you feel while doing the activity? Nice, Marcia. And why, of course. What did you learn from this? Tell me 2 things that you found interesting or important. I like that. Important. That's really cool. What was important and why? Did you need help? No, a little or a lot of help. Okay, so depending on our learners, we might want to use scales as well, not just open questions, but making them, encouraging them to actually make a choice to assess their experience in some way. How did you feel about the exercise? Identify your strengths and weaknesses in the learning process. That's nice. Strengths too, really important to keep that in there. I think not just challenges and things that they struggled with, but also what they were successful at and why. How did you feel in the activity? How confident do you feel about what you've just learned? How can you apply it in your everyday life? Lovely question, Wilma. I like that a lot. Let's try another time and tell me if it gets easier. Okay, if it was challenging, nice. What did you like and not like? What did you learn? How can you use it in your life? I really like this one. How can you apply it in your life? You've got some great stuff here. I hope you're getting to read each other's questions too. Huge amount of expertise in the room today. Let me share with you some of the questions that I use with my students to help them reflect on their learning. I'll give you a chance just to read those. There are more coming up too. I like this question. Did anything get in the way of my progress? And if so, what? We've all had those experiences where we're learning something and we get to a point where we feel stuck somehow. What's causing that? What's making that happen? So there are 5 questions there. There's another 5 questions here. And of course, in digital and remote learning contexts, having learners reflect on the different learning aids and tools that they've used really helps them identify which are most valuable for them for supporting their learning going forward. And again, the last question here is one that I particularly like. Could I teach what I learned to someone else? Because that really helps learners think about how deeply they've understood something. Okay, so these are lots of questions that we can use to help our learners reflect and evaluate. But what about the process of learners actually using these questions? So you might begin by giving them a set of questions to discuss. And if you're teaching online, then of course you can do that in breakout rooms. And if you're teaching face-to-face, then of course they can discuss those in groups, but they can also collate their ideas digitally. So you can invite them. Somebody mentioned earlier on Flip. You can invite them to record a video of their answers if they're not face-to-face, or even if they are, they could do this separately, or it could be a homework task, and upload it to a video sharing platform such as Flip. So Flip, if you don't know what it is, check it out. It's really cool. It's a website and application that allows teachers to facilitate video discussions. So you can organize students into groups, you can give them an access code, and they engage in discussion by recording short videos of themselves asking and answering questions. And finally, you can encourage learners to watch each other's videos, give feedback, make comments, and record a reply. And that's this nice brings in that nice interactive element as well. So they're working independently and autonomously, but they're still taking part in meaningful interactions. Okay, so we've looked at these 3 dynamic stages of autonomous learning and how we can support the development of learner autonomy in digital and online learning contexts. And remember that these stages should be viewed as an ongoing process, so that reflection and evaluation, they inform students' future planning and so on. And we've looked at just a few different digital tools. Now, of course, there are so many, and we saw from the chat box that you're already familiar with lots of different things. You can find out more on the Cambridge World of Better Learning website. We'll share a link to that a little bit later. And of course, once you've taught learners how to use a particular tool and they've reflected on what they find valuable and useful about that tool, they can then make choices about what to use to support their learning independently going forward. But as well as using online learning aids and digital tools to support students in becoming more autonomous, we also need to think about course materials. So before we finish today, I just want to talk a bit about materials and the kind of features that we need to be looking out for. So the materials that we choose need to provide clear guidance for students, so instructions and tips that support students through their independent learning. And this will help them to plan their learning, but also to monitor what's going on. And regular feedback is also really important for helping students monitor and control their own learning, as well as reflect on their learning. And we need materials that include progress tracking to help students independently evaluate their learning. And this will help them to determine the next goals and continue to plan their learning going forward. So these are kind of key features to look out for when you're choosing course materials to use in digital learning contexts. And as well as helping learners become more autonomous, when materials have these features built in, this can really reduce the workload for you as a teacher. And if you are looking, or your institution are looking for content that includes these features, then I recommend checking out Evolve Digital. You should be able to scan the QR code here on the screen. Maybe we can get a link to the site in the chat box as well towards the end of the session. So Evolve Digital, if you don't know it, it's a 6-level online general English course. It takes students from A1 to C1 level. And it's fully flexible. This is really nice. You can use it 100% online with no face-to-face classes, or the online work can be supported in face-to-face classes with a teacher. And it has these 3 key features. It has clear guidance, it has progress tracking, and it has regular feedback. And the link is there. So thank you, Sergio, for putting that. That is there in the chat box now. We'll post it again at the end in case you miss it, because I know there's lots of things going through. Thanks, Sergio. That's great. Couple of other things to share with you here. So the first QR code will take you to the Cambridge World of Better Learning site, where you can find out more about learner autonomy. And this link that I've put here has some video tips, as well as a range of useful tools on that page. And the second QR code will take you to a series of posts related to digital learning. So I'll give you a moment just in case you want to scan those. And Sergio, I don't know, maybe we can get those in the chat box too. That would be really cool if you're able to do that. But you can also just go to the Cambridge World of Better Learning blog, and if you search for learner autonomy or you search for digital learning, then you will find those there as well. It's very well organized. It's not difficult to find stuff. Okay, and you're welcome, Lisa. I have another question for you. One more question. You've been fantastic today, so thank you, especially on a Friday afternoon. I know it's the end of a long week. But before we wrap up, one more question. For you, what one idea, resource, or activity will you take away from today's session? What can you see yourself using with your students in your face-to-face or online or hybrid class? What idea do you want to think about more? What's inspired you? Let's get your ideas in the chat box one last time. Okay, Wilma, capture grid. Yeah, it's cool. Love it. Really like it. Capture grid. Have a think about it, Wilma, because you can use it in lots of different ways. It doesn't have to just be for reflection. It can be for feedback as well. It's really cool, especially when students are giving each other feedback. Elaine saying capture grid too, and Henrique, yeah, it is a nice task. I do like it. My students like it too. And I think the nice thing about a grid or a framework or something like that is it focuses students' attention on what they need to think about. If they just have a blank piece of paper, it's really hard, isn't it, to know where to start. Shalina, to establish progress tracking and feedback regularly with my students. Yeah, absolutely. And get that coming from them as well, getting them identifying where they're making progress and why and how is that happening. Liza said the forethought and planning, monitoring and control, reflection and evaluation model. If you keep those three things in mind, that kind of looking forward, looking in the moment, looking back, getting students to think consciously about those things, then you know that you're covering everything. Asking students to reflect on their learning more often and more formally, Henrique, nice, yeah. Using more tools and more online classes to make them more exciting, lovely. And get your students to share their ideas for that as well. I think the thing about things constantly changing and evolving that can make it, it makes it really challenging for us as teachers. We've got so much to do already, and we've got a lot to keep up with. Our students know stuff. Let's get them to bring that stuff to class too. Tools that people shared here that I didn't know of, Angela. Yeah, me too. I've got a couple of notes here, so thank you guys. Okay, we're gonna finish up there. I'm gonna invite Sergio to come back in and join us. And I just want to say, first of all, what a fantastic chat box. Probably the best chat box that I've ever been part of. So thank you for all of your great contributions. Sergio.
That's true. Yeah, that's true, Jade. We have a few minutes to answer two questions from the Q&A box. One from Marcia Beginotti. She says, she asks, how can we motivate students for doing homework?
Mm-hmm.
Most of them do not like to write anymore. They just want to see videos, but practicing writing is really difficult.
Yeah, good question. Really good question. I mean, motivating students, it's a huge topic, and there are so many answers to this that it's a whole nother session at least. But in relation to learner autonomy, I think getting them to consider why they find it, what they find challenging about it, why they're not motivated, what might motivate them more. There are obvious things like making the content related to their interests and their everyday life, and making it relevant and useful for them. Of course, that's a big motivating factor. But my advice to you would be to talk to your students and get them to look at, what do we find challenging about this? Why don't we want to do it? What would motivate us more and why? And I think if it was me, I would start by getting my students to write about that. Especially if I want them to write more, I'd get them to write about that, write their answers. And just to follow on from that a little bit as well, I would say maybe think about the type of writing that they're doing. So if it's, you want them maybe to write lots of, long text essay type stuff, start off with something smaller, start off with a kind of chat room thing where they can respond to each other. And it can be more conversational to start with, and then prompt them to put longer responses.
Okay, we have another question from Luan. How can I help you? How can I help adult students with tight schedules to develop more autonomy to practice English between one class and another?
Yeah, good question, Luan. Thank you. It can be really difficult. I mean, we have lives, we have things to do. And finding time to learn can be really difficult. But it's really important as well, because it's not enough, is it? If it's just, one class, especially if it's a once a week lesson, it's not enough to learn a language, for heaven's sake, it's crazy. So I think it's finding things that will fit into their schedules that are interesting and relevant for them. So it might be, for example, if they have to prepare something for work, maybe let's say they have to prepare a report or something, getting them to make notes about it in English first, or getting them to think about how they would explain something in their workplace in English. That's a really good one, particularly if you've got adults that are, they have tight schedules because they're, they have to do all sorts of things for work. For most people, being able to talk about their work in English is important and valuable. So trying to sort of bridge that gap, I think, between their own life and the classroom, and setting them tasks that will be helpful for their language development, but also helpful for whatever else they're doing in their life.
Right. I think we have time just for one question. I'm sorry, there are some others, but this one is really a general one. How to strike a balance between being supportive and fostering autonomy?
Yeah, I was hoping that you would pick out that question, actually. It's such a good one. I think for me, I say to my students, what do you need from me? What can you do on your own? That's, for me, it's getting them to understand that I'm not there to make learning happen for them. I'm there to facilitate it. So it's getting them to identify what do they need from the teacher, and how can they progress in such a way that what they need from the teacher gradually becomes less and less. If we're going to be effective as teachers, ultimately, we want to make ourselves redundant so that students don't need us anymore. Eventually, there'll be more students, don't worry.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Jade, for this brilliant session. It was really helpful. Thank you very, very much for being with us. And thank you all the participants to be with us. Thank you very much for your time in this Friday afternoon. And I'll see you in the next one, in the next webinar very soon. Thank you very much.
And thank you,
Thanks
Julia.
a lot.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.